Hi, everybody. Eve Harrow, and it is Rejuvenation on the Land of Israel Network. When you're hearing this, I'm probably going to be on my way to the United States to start my first speaking tour of March. So pre-taping this a couple of days earlier. And I am delighted to have on the line Peter Baum, all the way from the UK, someone whose emails I've been getting for quite a while, who I see is very, very active in pro-Israel events on the other side of the channel. And so I asked Peter to join me today. Peter, thanks so much for making time to join us here on the Land of Israel Network.
It's a pleasure, Eve. Thank you for having me on.
All right. So England is in the news all the time. And it's so funny because I get lots of emails and lots of updates on the news. And I got, of course, what you are doing for the pro-Israel activists in where you live. But then I get something yesterday that said that Brexit was actually very good for Israel and the current government of England is very good for Israel. But then, of course, we're inundated all the time with Corbyn and the Labour Party and flat out anti-Semitism. And I see from your work that you are now, what's going on in Ireland is just ridiculous. So just tell us from your perspective as a British Jew. I was just there at Limud UK, as my listeners know, at the end of December. What is going on in your country?
Okay, Eve, there are a number of things going on all at the very same time. And a lot of it is very uncomfortable. Not only if you're a British Jew, but if you're a European Jew. Now, one thing that our beautiful state of Israel is, we know that the beautiful state of Israel is excellent in various fields: technology, medicine, tourism, food, etc., etc., etc. The one thing, unfortunately, that Israel has not been good at in the last 3 decades, which is how long I've been a fairly serious activist, is public relations. And unfortunately, we've given a huge amount of ground to those elements in European society and globally, I should say, that are very anti-Israel, such as the BDS movement. Now, at the moment in Europe, we have a very strong BDS movement, and no other nation is more behind BDS than the Republic of Ireland, a very important part of the European Union. And unfortunately, the Republic of Ireland have managed to start the ball rolling for some legislation which, quite frankly, replicates the National Socialist agenda of the 1930s.
Wow.
And they have huge support from the various opposition groups in Europe and in the Labour Party, which is currently the UK opposition party, under Jeremy Corbyn, who has been an active anti-Israeli perpetrator ever since the 1970s. Now, unfortunately, because of the way the UK voting system works, Jeremy Corbyn, by accident, has found himself heading Her Majesty's opposition.
It's amazing.
And it is amazing. And if there were an election now, although the polls aren't favourable to him, in fact, we're losing ground in the polls. Nevertheless, there is a huge amount of personal support for him personally and for his, let's say, international ideologies. And one of those ideologies is being virulently opposed to the Jewish state of Israel, which many people will say, well, if you're opposed to the Jewish state of Israel, you are not necessarily anti-Semitic. In
Right.
Corbyn's case, and I hope he hears this and sues me, he is a rabid anti-Semite. Historically, he has. We have experience of some of the worst statements emanating from any European politician.
Even to the point that some of the people in his party have quit. For some of my listeners who may not be familiar with the ins and outs of the United Kingdom, like I was in Ireland a few years ago with my husband, actually the summer of 2014, just if I digress for a minute. We went to hear Neil Young in Cork. My husband is a big Neil Young fan. And the day that we got there, the war broke out in Israel, one of the wars in Gaza in 2014. So as we're getting to the concert, I get a text message. I think a soldier had been killed. So I was really upset. We get out of the car, and there is an anti-Neil Young demonstration going around outside the concert because he was going to go to Israel after he was in Ireland, or as part of the tour that he was doing. So, of course, there were people there who were very upset with him for putting Israel on the map and for being willing to go to Israel. In the end, he didn't go because of the war. So we almost didn't make it into the concert because I got so upset. I got into an argument outside till my husband said, I want to go to the concert and not sit with you in jail all night. Can you just tone it down? But when we were in Ireland for that week, 8 days, we saw, and a lot of people aren't aware of that there's a difference between parts of Ireland. So like Dublin is not the same as Belfast. In the Republic of Ireland, like you just go down the road and suddenly you're moving from the euro and from kilometers on the road signs into, miles and everything and pounds. You have to pay that in pounds. So if you can just give a little explanation about what's going on in Ireland itself, and then is there a difference between the different parts of Ireland and how they relate to Israel?
Yes, there is, and let me explain. So basically, you have two separate countries forming the island of Ireland. You have Northern Ireland, which is part of the United Kingdom, along with Scotland, Wales, and England. Those four nations form part of the United Kingdom. And Northern Ireland has been historically and still is Protestant and very pro-Israel. Of that, there is no doubt. Then you have a separate country bordering Northern Ireland and far bigger than Northern Ireland, which goes under the name of the Republic of Ireland, a member state of the European Union, which is predominantly Catholic and historically very anti-Israel. Now, not only anti-Israel, but I should say anti-Semitic. And the origination of Ireland's anti-Semitism was really formed in the Middle Ages with conservative Catholicism. That's the starting point of it. So if we fast forward to just before the Second World War, Ireland always had a tiny Jewish population. And what your listeners may not know, and why I believe Ireland has taken such a strong anti-Israel view in modern times, really emanates from the anti-Semitism that's always run through its DNA. What your listeners probably don't know about the Republic of Ireland are the following, and these facts I'm sure are going to shock your listeners. Did they know that Ireland was the only country in the world to offer condolences on the death of Adolf Hitler?
Wow.
Now, just think about that. Just think about that for a second. Take a deep breath and take that point in. That's the first thing. The second thing is that Ireland had the chance of taking in 500 during World War II, I'm talking about, had the chance of taking in 500 French children from France into Ireland to save them from the concentration camps. When the Irish Parliament realised that these were no ordinary French children, but Jewish French children, they refused them entry. And excuse my emotion, and the kids died in the concentration camps.
Wow.
Did your listeners also know that after the war, Ireland actively helped wanted Nazi war criminals escape and allowed others to live in open society within the Republic of Ireland? Now, I give you numerous examples of Ireland's love affair with the National Socialists. And to this very day, I think this is true, but some of your listeners may correct me. I believe that Ireland is still the only democracy, it may even be the only nation in the world, to have on open display memorials to Nazi collaborators, on open display in Dublin and in Limerick. And the politicians who are leading one of the parties which is bringing the BDS legislation, that is the Sinn Féin party, a nationalist Irish Republican party, actually paid homage to one of those memorials. It's to a gentleman, a Nazi collaborator by the name of Sean Russell, who has a memorial in Fairview Park in Dublin, and Mary Lou MacDonald of the Sinn Féin party actually paid homage to that memorial. So you can see that I believe it's cowardice hiding behind anti-Semitism. It's all too easy to criticise the Jewish state of Israel and that because of their relationship with the Palestinians. But what is driving this Irish legislation is Jew hatred. Because if the Irish were really pro-Palestinian, let's say, they would be putting in the same legislation for, let's say, Syria or Iran or Russia, very recently, who have tortured Palestinians, killed Palestinians in their war against ISIS. They may have even put in legislation against the government of Jordan or Pakistan. You know, in the Black September, Jordan and Pakistan slaughtered God knows how many Palestinians during Black September. This is not a pro-Palestinian piece of legislation. This is an
anti-Israel
state, anti-Jewish state.
Right. So you're saying their anti-Semitism has just taken a different form. During World War II, it took the form of not saving Jews, and now it's taken the form of being against Israel as a nation. So really, they're being quite consistent in what they're doing now, and nobody should be shocked based on what you're saying. This is in their DNA.
You're absolutely right. But what people are shocked about now is the challenge, a grassroots challenge that people like myself started, and it's actually taking hold. I'm sure you're aware, Eve, there is a lovely, beautiful Yiddish word, my grandparents used to use it, called broigus. It's anger. I can't think of an equivalent word.
Extreme annoyance. Yes,
annoyance.
Right.
So broigus, now an acronym for broigus, which I developed, is Boycott, Republic of Ireland Goods and Services. And it just started off as a grassroots movement amongst people in my own community in Southend where I live. And now this has gone not only nationwide, but it's gotten global because I've put it on Facebook to groups worldwide, and people are giving me feedback. They're saying, Peter, I've just cancelled my cruise around the British Isles because it stops round at Dublin and Cork. Another guy from New York said to me, Peter, I own 30 bars around the States and I'm full of Irish whiskies. I'm going to let the stocks run down. I'm going to find alternatives.
Oh, no, now you're really asking people to go out there. If you're asking people to stop drinking Irish whiskey?
I am indeed. And the amazing thing is that because of the, let's say, lucrative tax treatments that the Republic of Ireland has given companies to set up there, many food and pharmaceutical companies have established manufacturing plants out there. Even Teva, I believe, has a major manufacturing.
Does Google have a center in Dublin? I remember when we were there for Shabbat. I spoke in the synagogue there, and there were Israelis who were living there at the time, and other Jews who were not Irish, but were there in the community because I thought it was Google or one of the big companies was set up there.
You're absolutely right. So all we're asking for is for individuals to commercially shelve products that are manufactured in the Republic of Ireland and find alternatives. But how wonderful it would be if a major company like Intel, actually I'll talk about Intel in a minute, but like Teva, would to say to the Irish government, you know what, if you continue with this atrocious piece of legislation, we're thinking of pulling out. Just something that would give...
You think that's a possibility?
If we get this going as gaining the momentum that it has been going? I'd like to think so. Now, I read recently, I'm sure this has nothing to do with our campaign, and I'm going back to Intel here. I'm sure I read recently that Intel had the opportunity of investing, and I think the amount was $11 billion, and this is very recent, in either Israel or Ireland. And they've chosen Israel to establish one of their. So I would appreciate it if if any of your listeners familiar with this would kind of get back to you and say, that's absolutely
well, I
true.
know that Intel has a very big R&D here in Israel because they get a lot of bang for their buck here. They get a lot of, great people working for them. And a lot of the things that people don't even realize that are in their computers are actually developed here in Israel. But I'm going to play devil's advocate for a second here. If we're upset with the BDS movement for obviously boycotting Israeli products. So what you're doing is essentially putting in a BDS movement against Ireland. So somebody Absolutely could say to you, well, maybe we should just say all boycotts are bad, but you're doing the same thing that you say that you're against. So How would you answer that?
Easily. I tell you why. Because if Ireland passed their legislation, that would make any one of us a criminal who were in the Republic of Ireland and bought a product emanating from certain parts of Israel. That would make you a criminal. I'm not going to be making anyone a criminal, and no one is going to be criminalized just by not drinking Irish whiskey and reverting to Scots whiskey or Japanese whiskey. All we're saying is, we as individuals, if we are so upset by this piece of legislation, we as individuals can do something about it. We don't have to shout from the rooftops. All we have to do is avoid buying products that are originated in the Republic of Ireland, manufactured, made or packaged there. If we're going on a cruise, we can avoid not. If we're going on the British Isles, we don't have to go and spend money in the Republic of Ireland. It's a challenge mounted by individuals as what we perceive to be a piece of Nazi-type legislation, which would criminalize people just for buying products manufactured in Israel.
So you're saying if somebody in Ireland, if this legislation passes, if somebody buys a box of medjool dates that are grown in the Jordan Valley, parts of which are considered not Israel by people that were liberated in Israel in 1967, that would actually be a criminal act?
€250,000 fine and or 5 years imprisonment.
Unbelievable.
Isn't that so?
Really unbelievable.
Could not make it up. And although it has to go through certain stages, it's just passed its second stage and was voted by an overwhelming majority, 75 to 45, in the second house of the Irish Parliament. Now, I think it has to go through 3 more stages. Even those Irish politicians who are opposed to the legislation are only opposed to it because of the probability that Ireland would be sanctioned by Donald Trump's administration for imposing this effective BDS legislation against Israel. But they are wholly sympathetic to it, which gives you some idea of what's going on in this day and age, 70 years after the Holocaust.
Now they're part of the EU, as you said, correct? Right. But the EU is not sanctioning them? The European Union is just letting this go by?
The European Union, there is some debate at the moment whether if the legislation were actually passed, whether Ireland would be breaking European Union trade laws. No one has come up with a definitive answer, and I've been reading paper after paper, some saying they would be breaking laws, some saying they wouldn't. But I assure you, if this gets passed, this is what we say in the United Kingdom, the thin edge of the wedge. And what annoys me most, Eve, it goes back to my original point about the beautiful country and the beautiful people in the Jewish state of Israel. You are so good at so many things, but public relations has been a major failure. And we need people, I'm not saying people like me necessarily, but people who are eloquent, who can elegantly express Israel's case. And I think the last person who was actually able to do that in a beautiful way was the late great Abba Eban at the
Mm-hmm.
Nations. Since that man, I have seen no other Israeli politician or
Right.
commentator who comes anywhere close to his eloquence, his passion, and his ability to win over audiences.
Mm-hmm.
We need people like that to put over Israel's case. And unfortunately, we're severely lacking
So,
in
as
that.
an Israeli who does put forth Israel's case, along with a lot of wonderful people that are, let's say, on this radio station, for example, the Land of Israel Network, it is very frustrating for us because we have had to do it over the years on our own. And I've gotten thrown out of the foreign ministry on more than one occasion for daring to say that, as you said, the political echelon in Israel doesn't make the case properly. And I think a lot of it has to do because they themselves aren't on message, because they're quite confused as to what the message is, which is why I would love to see someone like Carolyn Glick, be Israel's foreign minister. That would be an amazing thing. But that's something that we in Israel have to take care of, is our own internal politics and the face that we show the world. Let me ask you about yourself. How did you get involved in what seems to be really a consuming passion and love for the Jewish state?
Okay. So I was always brought up in a secular British household, not particularly religious, but, went through bar mitzvah, and my wife and I got married under a chuppah, etc., etc., etc. And ever since I've been 20 years old, I was lucky enough to find myself in a job in the international capital markets that took me round the world.
Mm-hmm.
And in the 70s, unlike today, where on your phone you can tune into a radio station
Right.
or a TV channel worldwide, in the old days, all I had, believe it or not, in the hotel rooms that I stayed in, was the BBC World Service.
Ugh.
Okay?
Yes.
Now, it's very strange, but when I started tuning in after work, or when I came back from a night out to the BBC World Service, it was two things were incredible to me. The first one was the disproportionate attention that Israel received compared to other countries in the world.
Mm-hmm.
But not only the amount of attention, but the amount of negative attention.
Right.
And the BBC is a trusted brand, probably the most trusted media brand, even now, globally.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, for the last probably 5 decades, it has just spewed out program after program of anti-Israel negativity. It's almost been a propaganda channel for the Palestinian cause.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, I see that on the TV screens. For example, in the last 4 decades, there have been, I think, 4 genocides on the continent of Africa. Democratic Congolese Republic, Central African Republic, Angola, Burundi, etc. I don't think the BBC has devoted one programme in the last 4 decades to any of those genocides in Africa. Oh, Rwanda being another one.
Mm-hmm.
They have covered Rwanda after the event, but whilst 800,000 Hutus got slaughtered in 2 months, the BBC weren't there. But take the case of the Palestinian teenager caught hitting an Israeli soldier. Is her name Ahed Tamimi?
Yes, yes.
So I work closely with a news monitoring site called New Fair Reporting, and we calculate that the BBC have devoted no less than 240,000 hours. Let me repeat that for your listeners.
240,000 hours?
Hours of news output dedicated to that one woman slapping an Israeli soldier.
That's an outrageous number.
It is. Now, it was on the BBC News website, I think, for 100 consecutive days. 100, and that news website is in 30 different languages, but it's also on the rolling news, on the text page.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just a disproportionate amount of time, and you can be assured that that all of that was pro the girl and
Sure.
the state of Israel. And yet, when 5.7 million Africans are slaughtered in 5 genocides, the BBC isn't there. So to tell you what got me turned on to pro-Israel activism, it was whilst working in the capital markets, and as I've become retired, as my working career has gone down, I've been able to dedicate myself more to the issues that are so close to my heart, which is basically the well-being of the state of Israel. And the only way I, as an individual, can do that is to challenge some of the what I perceive to be an agenda of anti-Jewish state bias amongst much in the media. I would suggest, if I was in America, I think I'd feel the same way recently about CNN.
Mm-hmm.
To be a decent, impartial news media channel, all I see now when I turn onto CNN here is they just mock Donald Trump. It's an anti-Trump.
But I have to ask you. I mean, I'm just so curious because there's a lot of people who listen to the BBC and listen to CNN and just get upset or turn it off or gripe or throw something at the television. But you took it further. You didn't just get upset. You said, and not only did you take it further, you've galvanized many other people to also take it further. Why? Have you any idea? Does your family come from persecution, from Holocaust? Do you have like a personal, realize that where this starts, we all know where the story ends? Well, what do you think about yourself got you to really take it to the place where we are today?
Right. Well, I am, as an individual, and my family are passionate about the well-being of the state of Israel, probably because of the history of the Jewish people. That's the first thing. The second thing is what we perceive to be how lies have morphed into fact, and how people accept the lies that the propaganda that the media channels like the BBC have been able to perpetuate unchallenged for the last 5 or 6 decades. For example, I would argue with anyone that if you are pro-Palestinian, what is driving that is not only anti-Semitism. Now, this is going to really make some of your listeners laugh, but actually it's being Islamophobic as well. Because if you actually understand the Quran, which I've tried to study, it's actually a Zionist document. It actually
a lot of it does justify the Jewish presence in the land of Israel. Absolutely.
And there is not one mention of Jerusalem in the Quran. So when I see time after time politicians, anti-Israeli politicians, spew out the vomit that Jerusalem is so important to the Palestinians, this is just rubbish. It's lies. And I would like to, now, we don't know what's going to happen, whether there be a Palestinian state or not in the future. But what I intend to do until the politicians agree on something is to challenge the lies perpetuated by the media and let people make up their own minds. Many people who aren't interested in the Israeli-Palestinian issue in the United Kingdom automatically have sympathy for the Palestinians. And that's as a direct result of the propaganda perpetuated over the last 5 or 6 decades. And
but you in the UK have your own Muslim problem to a great degree. I mean, for those who want to dig just a little bit deeper, and it doesn't take an insane amount of effort. I know one of the organizations you also write for, Gatestone Institute, they have uncovered a lot of this, that in different parts of London, let's say, there's all kinds of gangs, there's neighborhoods that the police don't go into, that there has not been, shall we say, very successful integration of some of the Muslim population into England itself. So do you think part of the reaction that your average UKer has is also because he doesn't want the growing Muslim population in England to start up. There's traditional anti-Semitism, which someone once told me is just an inherent part of being British, even though most people wouldn't admit it, kind of left over, let's say, from the colonial era. And then there is the other people who've shown up in England who also, for their own reasons, are anti-Semitic, the Muslims, and that the British here are trying to maybe keep it quiet, and that's where all of this is fitting in?
Yeah, there is a lot of truth in what you're saying. The Muslim population in the United Kingdom is undoubtedly very, very, very anti-Israel. There is no doubt about that.
Mm-hmm.
And and it is a truth that no British government would want to upset the Muslim population, because one of the things that it's very unfashionable these days to be called Islamophobic.
Mm-hmm.
So that's off the radar, and it has allowed, and because the Jewish population is so small, we number less than 250,000 in the UK. From a voting bloc, we don't carry much weight,
mm-hmm.
whereas the Muslim population, which is probably numbering something like 1 to 2 million, are quite substantial. Where the Jewish population have friends is certainly within the Indian community, the Sikhs and the Punjabis,
mm-hmm.
and we definitely have friends there, and also within the Kurdish community.
Interesting.
There are very strong bonds.
And you also said the Protestant community is also
the Protestant
more?
community is very, very pro-Israel.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, if you were a regular, ordinary Englishman that really didn't know too much about the Israel-Palestinian situation, undoubtedly, because of the media propaganda over the last 50, 60, 70 years,
mm-hmm.
you undoubtedly have sympathy with Palestinians, even though you wouldn't know where they originated from, that Jerusalem isn't in the Quran, that their charters,
mm-hmm.
the annihilation of Jews, Freemasons, Rotarians,
right.
charity workers, and that Christians have to be subservient to Islam. You wouldn't know that. It's just not spoken about. So what I see as my role is to get that message across. Unfortunately, the BBC would never have someone like myself
right.
on, because I would say it how it is. And I don't think I've seen any, even if they're a pro-Israeli commentator, and I don't know whether it's because of lack of knowledge or fear. It could be
mm-hmm.
both.
Could definitely be that.
I don't think I've seen any pro-Israel commentator speak about the issues that I'm talking to you and your listeners about. For example, no one would ever mention in Ireland the fact that they still have memorials to Nazi collaborators.
Mm-hmm.
No one would ever say that. I'm sure. Why? I don't know. It could be.
Is there an attempt to pull the lens out? That this is not just about Israel and the Palestinians, but this is actually a regional issue. That Iran is not going to be a big friend of the UK should they decide to go nuclear. Their sights are on the West. Israel is just the appetizer. Is that part of what you do when that advocacy is to take the focus off just what's happening between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean and pull it out to where it really belongs? Is that this is a region where every country outside of Israel, women don't have the proper rights. There's no freedom of speech. If you're a Sunni in a Shia country, you're going to get killed. If you're a Kurd in Syria, you're going to get killed. Forget about what's going to happen to you in Turkey. That this is much, much bigger than people assume it to be. This is not just about Israel. The effects, if Israel goes down, are on everybody.
Conveniently ignored in our media. Now, I'll give
Incredible.
you an example. So you would know that Donald Trump's administration has imposed sanctions on the government of Iran.
Mm-hmm.
Okay?
Reimposed.
You're absolutely right. Running parallel with Donald Trump's reimposition of sanctions on Iran as the European Union trying to implement a payment system between the European Union nations and Iran in order to facilitate trade between EU companies and Iran. Mm-hmm. Now, that is the kind of absurdities that we're up against. I'll give you another kind of absurdity we're up against, certainly in Europe. We have a devastating war going on in Yemen.
Yes.
The total negativity on that issue is blaming the Saudis, who are being supplied by Israel and the US militarily.
Mm-hmm.
There has not been any call for a similar, there has not been any similar type media attention focused on Iran, who had backed the Houthi rebels for starting the war.
Well, they're the world's biggest sponsor of terrorism, bar none.
But all the focus in the UK, whatever radio program you listen to, whatever TV debating program you speak on, when you see the BBC text news, it is always focused on being anti-Saudi rather than balanced and anti as much Iran's fault as Saudi's fault. So to answer your question, there is a much wider geopolitical issue, but it seems to be conveniently ignored for reasons that I, as an individual, do not understand by the politicians within the European Union. I just don't get it. The thing that gives me some kind of comfort, however, is I'm told, and occasionally we do get to read about this, that there is huge cooperation between Israel and the European Union on things like counter-terrorism and cybersecurity. Now, those are things that don't hit the headlines.
And MI6, we do know about that, right?
But we do know that there is huge cooperation. We also know that numerous potential terrorist atrocities are prevented as a direct result of Israeli intelligence being fed to European countries. And although it's been challenging, and I think it will be challenging in the next few years, I do see some positivity on the horizon. Today, for example, before we Skyped each other, I just read that Australia finally stood up at the UN and actually blasted some UN committee for being so focused on Israel. I see virtually every day some of the developing relationships that your government has created with the continent of Africa. I think you have the Liberian president, you have the Senegalese president.
Chad, right.
There's work going on in Cameroon and various other African states. That is a real cause for rejoicing. So see that. Of course, it doesn't get any media attention over here, but it's absolutely wonderful. We also know that apart from Malaysia, perhaps, Israel has some really good friends in the Far East, Japan and Korea, and the amount of development, technology development that the Chinese are putting into Israel. So we know it's all a lost cause. Unfortunately, in Europe, it is very much still an uphill battle. If Corbyn ever became Prime Minister of the UK Labour Party, I think that would be a sign for many of us to leave.
Would you leave if Corbyn became Prime Minister?
If Corbyn became Prime Minister, that would probably be the instigating factor for like myself to leave the country. And we've seen what's happening in France with the Yellow Vest movement.
Right.
Started off as a working class protest movement, has morphed somehow into being a hugely anti-Semitic movement. And I had noticed that Macron is fighting against that. So much of this anti-Semitism, I feel, is being driven by what's happening economically within the European Union. Because I work in the financial markets, I have been most of my life, something that your own listeners may not be aware of I don't mean to be patronising. They may not know this. Italy, being the third largest economy in Europe, is on the brink of recession.
Italy.
On the brink of recession.
What is that, after Germany and?
Well, Germany and France.
Right.
France with this yellow vest movement, when we see the economic numbers in the next 6 to 9 months, I'm sure we're going to see France teetering on the brink of recession as well. Spain and Greece and Southern Europe are having, because of the immigrant problem coming into their countries, is being hugely impacted. Paradoxically, the one country that I would love to be in recession but is doing quite well economically is the Republic of Ireland. But that's as a direct result of two things: that the immigrants don't want to go there, and B, that they have favourable tax treatment for companies, which I think in itself may be breaching European Union laws. But that's another matter.
So your feeling for the future of Jews in the UK is fairly dim at this point, huh?
Only no, if the Labour government under Jeremy Corbyn got into, and as I said to you, this time last year it was a very real possibility. But if we've had some defections from the Labour Party quite recently, which has meant that his majority has declined. So if the polls are anything to go by about decreasing Labour membership and popularity polls, it's unlikely that he would be Prime Minister. And just to give you an example of that, your listeners might want to know, a guy like me, pro-Israel, pro-Jewish, very anti-Corbyn and anti-Labour, joined the Labour Party when he got into power. Now, why? Because I wanted to see what was going on. I wanted to be fed back all the news bulletins, all the meetings that were going on, etc., to get a feel, to understand from. I was no Labour, so his membership was boosted in a large part by people like myself who were and wanted to know what was going on. I'm now no longer a member of the Labour Party because within a few months I understood completely what was going on.
Right.
So I feel that if there were a general election tomorrow, I feel this man would win power. However, if he did, that would be a sign to me, that would be the most uncomfortable I would have felt as a Jew in my 65 years of being in the United Kingdom.
That's saying something. And I hear what you mean about recessions and those kinds of stresses on communities and on nations usually bring out anti-Semitism, which seems to be coming from the furthest left right now, even more than our traditional concern of it coming from the furthest right.
Yeah, when it comes to Jew hatred, that's where the far left and the far right meet. I don't think that there's I don't think there was a differentiation whether you're far left or far right. That's the one thing that you have in common. The only thing in this in the United Kingdom at the moment, the far right, although the media like to give it a lot of attention, it is nothing like as strong as the far left. Sure, you might get a few nutters flying Nazi flags in their garden, but the far left is really where it's happening because it's been given credibility by the
leadership.
By the leadership.
So, Peter, if somebody wants to join your mailing list and get your updates and see what you're doing, perhaps help join some of the campaigns or push forward some of the things that you're doing, how would they get in touch with you?
Okay, so I'm on Facebook, and I've tried to get going on Twitter, but I've been a dismal failure.
But how about the old-fashioned way, which is your email and getting on a list?
I really don't have the competencies on Twitter, but on Facebook I do have a page, but I've got an email, which I have an email list to, and it's very simple, Eve. It's just peterbaum@hotmail.co.uk. And also, if your listeners go into, I write for Gatestone, as you said. There's something that before we end, there's something I would like to mention. I also write, believe it or not, for a pro-Israel Muslim online magazine which has a circulation of, I think, 1.5 to 3 million people.
Wow, amazing.
Which is quite incredible. And it's pro-Zionist, pro-Israel, anti-jihadist, etc. The name of the magazine is called Weekly Blitz.
That's a great thing to hear about.
And I've had, I guess, about 20 to 30 articles published by them.
Terrific.
And it really is amazing. It's published out of Bangladesh, not a friendly nation towards Israel, but the publisher, Saladin Chowdhury, is a very, very brave individual. And I would encourage, apart from your listeners, to get in touch with me via email, to go into the Weekly Blitz website and to see the kind of output this man is producing.
Fantastic.
It's heartwarming.
And that's also really a sense of hope for the future when all this insanity is behind us. Thank you so much, Peter Baum, for joining me today and really filling us in at great detail on what's happening in Ireland and in the UK. Everybody, signing off for today. You can go into my website, eveharrow.com, to see to where I'm going to be and to where I'm off. And of course, thanks to Tabitha and to Ben, you can always, of course, write to me, eve@thelandofisrael.com. Always happy to hear your feedback. And thanks for listening. Peter Baum, thank you so much again for joining us today. Terrific. And keep up the good work. And everybody, I just have to throw this in. If Peter can do it, so can you. There's no excuse for just listening and getting upset and not moving it forward, right? The good people have to take action because, as we've said a gazillion times already, the bad guys don't rest for a second. So we have to step up to the plate as well. Take care, everybody. Eve Harrow on the Land of Israel Network. Goodbye for now.
The Land of Israel Network presents the Israel-inspired retreat, Rosh Chodesh Adar Bet, a 3-night event by the Dead Sea, Thursday through Sunday, March 7th through March 10th, 2019. Spend an unforgettable Shabbat with your hosts, Ari and Shana Abramowitz, Yishai and Malka Fleischer, Jeremy and Tehila Gimpel, and special guests at the 5-star Royal Dead Sea Resort. For more information, visit our special website, thelandofisrael.travel. That's thelandofisrael.travel for the Israel-inspired retreat.